What's up, everybody? This is Vincent Chang, the Wandering Warrior. Recently I got a question. How did Shuaijiao, Chinese wrestling, how did that inform my Chang or long boxing, one of the more prevalent methodologies or arts within the traditional Chinese boxing arts, right? That's a really good question. I think it's high time I make a video talking about how training in so-called Chinese wrestling was so beneficial for my Chinese boxing. First off though, what is Chinese boxing? Alright, so when we're talking about Quan Shu, Chinese boxing, the traditional bare knuckle fighting arts, right? We're talking about arts that came up in a very turbulent time that had to fulfill roles of both civilian fighting and dueling and self-defense, as well as combat, military, paramilitary type roles. So they blend not only weapons and empty hands, but in the empty hands they have often what we call ti da shuai na, kicking, striking, throwing, and catch or locking and seizing. Right now, all of these skills are incredibly important in the traditional Chinese martial arts. So when we talk about Quan Shu, boxing methods, we're not talking about boxing like Western boxing where they stripped everything but the specific punches out of there. We're talking about something more akin to Muay Thai or MMA, right? And long boxing, long fist, Chang Quan, is essentially just one of the major sort of combat languages, and predominantly from northern China. Most Chinese boxing styles, especially from northern China, take after this kind of meta or pattern that we have now called long fist, long boxing. So I went to Taiwan in 2020, as you know, to train the Taiwanese version of Shuaijiao, fast, jiao, throwing or wrestling. And this Shuaijiao system was brought to Taiwan from Baoding City. There were at least 5 different sort of substyles of Baoding fast wrestling that was kind of like the Han and Hui Chinese approach to the Qing Dynasty Shuaijiao. So what is this Qing Dynasty Shuaijiao? Well, I've addressed this in other videos. It's essentially mostly Mongolian wrestling with a lot of Manchu influence and a lot of Manchu people doing it, and eventually in the late 1800s they started teaching the Han and Hui Chinese peoples of northern China. So this is not the indigenous Chinese wrestling that, as far as we know, in the medieval era looked kind of like sumo. It's not that, but it is a formidable wrestling style, definitely worth learning, and I got a lot out of training it. So back to the question. Okay, first of all, it's just good wrestling. When you have real dedicated wrestling training, that's better than learning a bunch of wrestling moves without dedicated wrestling training. Now, at the same time, this makes a lot of sense. If you are looking to prepare a person to have weapon skills and just overall combatives, and so if you've got ti da shuai na, kicking, striking, throwing, and catch wrestling, right? Locks, chokes, things like that, then it makes a lot of sense that your wrestling is not going to be as good because you're focused on so many different things. Your versatility and your ability to use your skills in any combative situation is more important than purely your wrestling skill. That said, by diving deep into pure wrestling skill, I was able to get my wrestling leveled up, and as you know now, I'm into Mongolian wrestling, and I got to see what exactly a lot of the long fist throws mean. Now, what do I mean by meaning? So what I mean is there's a real context to everything somebody does, right? Part of that is the overall meta of what they're dealing with in terms of combat, in terms of self-defense, what they needed to do to other people. However, there's another aspect to what I mean by the meaning. What do these moves mean? These Chang Quan, Tao Lu, of all various kinds, they tell you what was the person or people's game. What was their strategic doctrine? What were their tactics? What kind of moves go with what other moves? Some of these systems are much more wrestling based. I'm looking at Taiji, right? Taiji is mostly the wrestling, with some kicking and punching to get in, but it's mostly the wrestling. Some of these systems, say Qixing Tanglang Quan, 7-star Mantis boxing, are a blend between long fist style striking into Shandongese clinch work, clinch fighting. That's pretty cool, right? But you see there's like, okay, long fist moves, and then you're going into very Mantis moves. You know, we have others that focus a lot more on the punching, kicking, the catching of kicks and throwing people, the immediate countering of punches, and some of those immediate counters are with throws and takedowns and sweeps. So it's like, okay, some of these systems have a game plan where you're going to predominantly punch and kick, but you're going to use wrestling moves to nullify all this stuff. If someone's starting to outstrike you, you block, frame, you know, as you frame, maybe you chop into their neck, grab and throw them. If they try to kick at you, you're, oh shit, you block that, catch their leg, and then sweep them off their feet, and they beat the shit out of them, right? Or you pull your knife and finish the job. We're looking at different arts that kind of run the gamut, and that is one of the things that Shuaijiao was able to help me with, because the more I could understand the throws within these taolu, what our martial ancestors are passing down to us, the more I could understand, well, if you're doing this and this prior to using this sweep or this takedown or this throw, I'm starting to understand your game better. I'm starting to get in touch with a real human, with a real animal, with a real fighter back in the day, right? We'll put this together, whether it was his own game or whether he was putting it together for other people as a sort of template for them to understand how to fight. In addition to that, right, one thing I'm known as is sort of like a Kung Fu Taolu decoder. Like, I'm looking at forms, I can understand what they're telling us. And a lot of that also has to, you know, some of the credit has to be given to the Taiwanese Shuaijiao that I was training out in Taiwan. Because what wrestling has given me is the understanding of wrestling movement. So when I look at a form, I can see, the vector of force is coming out of one limb, right? You're setting up and you're launching everything through one limb. That's a strike, that's a kick. But if I see something coming out from 3 different directions, a pull, a push, and a sweep, a pull, a push, and a trip, okay, 2 arms pulling, body slamming into a long, low stance, that might be a double leg, right? So the more you understand wrestling, the more you understand wrestling movement, and that has helped me a lot in terms of so-called decoding Kung Fu. The stuff was before our eyes all along, but it was being misinterpreted willfully or misinterpreted by accident by people who didn't know how to fight or weren't taught how to fight, or were taught only a limited set of the skills within the system, and then they started teaching, right? And there's many reasons for that. I went over that in the whole Killing Kung Fu video. I won't go over it again, but you know, these are some problems with traditional Chinese martial arts. But the extinction of Chinese martial arts is not a foregone conclusion. That's part of why I'm here doing what I do. So I happen to be out here in the parking lot drying out my Shuaijiao Dalian, Shuaijiao jackets as we speak. I think one of the most significant things that wrestling has done for my traditional boxing is it's helped me to understand what role the punching, the striking, and the kicking play in this fighting meta. This fighting meta, we are so colored by Western boxing and kickboxing these days that we forget that that's not the only meta of fighting. Fighting on the street, fighting as a whole, can look really messy. You add clothing in there and you're grabbing people. Remember, these Chinese motherfuckers were wearing clothing, right? When you start adding all that together, the tussling, the grabbing into punches, the grabbing into throws and sweeps, trying to throw somebody into a knee and then sweeping them and, you know, pummeling them on the ground, that is fighting. Boxing, Western boxing is not fighting. Western boxing is Western boxing, and it has an important place in fighting. But fighting is just fighting, right? So what do the punches and the kicks mean in traditional Chinese boxing, in long fist, long boxing, Chang. Well, think of fighting this way. Think of it instead of thinking of this as boxing or kickboxing, think of this as wrestling. And instead of moving and unbalancing people by grabbing and, manipulating their bodies, or instead of just doing that, think of doing that with your strikes. So if I get someone to lean back because of my strikes, I got a takedown there. I got leg grabs, right? Leg seizing, double leg, single leg, ankle pick, right? If I get someone to lean forward because I just need them in the stomach, well, I got a throw there, right? If I get someone to stand light because of my leg kicks, I might have some sweeps coming up, right? If I got somebody rushing into me to nullify striking because they don't like that stuff, I might get an overhead throw. I might get an over shoulder throw, right? And I can use my strikes to nullify their wrestling. Instead of just framing against their neck, I can chop them in the neck, chop them in the clavicle, and then frame. Instead of just turning them this way, I can turn them, boom, elbow into a throw, right? Instead of sweeping, I can bend them over a bit. Instead of picking that leg with my foot, I can knee them in the liver, stomach, solar plexus, groin, head, right? So when you start looking at all of that striking, whether it's elbows, knees, forearms, fingers, fists and feet, and you start looking at it not as striking, but as implements to help you dominate their posture, which is a lot of wrestling. If you start looking at it like that, almost all the traditional Chinese martial arts start to make sense. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't Chinese martial arts that are more striking focused. I'm not saying there aren't Chinese martial arts that are essentially pugilism with a little bit of the kicking, wrestling, and catch. There's definitely different proportions, but many of the Chinese martial arts involve a lot of wrestling, or at the very least kinesthetic, like sticky boxing. That way you can control arms, because if you can't control arms, you can't control what the hands grab. If you can't control what the hands grab, that brick is hitting your head, that knife is in your ribs, that club is smashing your brains out, right? All right, heading on in. If you guys enjoyed that, definitely, give me a like, share, subscribe. I'm putting out this stuff because I want to help revive the efficacy, the pride, the dominant skills within Chinese martial arts and other martial arts as a whole. As you know, I'm a folk martial artist. I immerse, I get down with people, and I learn how they fight, why they fight that way, and how we can learn from that. And being the bridge between worlds, I try to do so in a way where not only are the folk martial artists getting their due and being empowered, but that you guys get to learn from their skills. And on that note, I've released my Jiben Changquan, my long boxing essentials course, or essentials of long boxing. Either way works. It's in the link below. Check that out if you're interested in understanding the framework, the methodology, and the most common skills, the nuts and bolts of what makes Chinese long boxing, Changquan, what makes it what it is, right? It's not an exhaustive technical list. It's not a whole bunch of forms. It's just breaking it down into what it is. What is the frame? What is the posture? What is this fighting stance? What are the strikes? How do you manage distance? How do you use punches and kicks? How do you have short strikes? How do you use your wrestling, and how do you weave all of that together? And that is essentially the ingredients of what makes any long boxing system. So if you're interested in that and you want to get good, check that out. You guys have been great. Thank you. If you have any more questions, let me know. I try to answer them when I have time, like today, on this wonderful afternoon. In any case, thank you for joining me on my journey. I salute yours. Peace.